No, thank you so much, Eric. I'm so excited. So thank you so much for inviting me here, and to all the students that unfortunately I cannot see, but I hope I will be able to see you at some point. Thank you for being with me for the next hour or so. As Eric mentioned, please don't hesitate if you have any questions during my presentation. Just let me know, and we can discuss whatever point at whatever time. There's going to be really two key areas I'm going to cover. One, which is much more general around the issue of children without family care, and then I'll stop there and see if you have any specific questions. And then after, I'll go more into the volunteering and volunteering in residential care and some of the issues and the work that we're doing. And at the end, we'll stop and for questions and hopefully a lot of discussions of way forwards, and as well as hearing your thoughts and what you're doing within this class as well. So do you all hear me okay?
Yes. That was a yes.
All right. I'm going to assume that yes. So before we start, I'm just going to highlight a little bit about who we are and who I am. So I'm Severine Chevrel. I'm the Senior Coordinator of the Better Care Network. What is the Better Care Network? It's a interagency network on the issue of children without adequate family care. Who are we? So we really work under the strategic guidance of our steering committee, which consists of UNICEF, Save the Children, USAID, Family for Every Child, RELAF, and Firelight Foundation. We also have an advisory group of over 45 experts on the issue of children without family care, and who are all over the world, and we reach out to provide guidance and to share learning and to come together and brainstorm on best way forwards on some of the issues that we identify. And then there's the Secretariat. So that's Florence Martin, my colleague, who's also based in New York, with myself. We're both based out of the UNICEF office. We also have Valens, who started last year to head the regional initiative in Eastern and Southern Africa, and who is based out of Kigali in Rwanda and covers that whole region. Any questions from here? This is really very basic. So then, what is the mission of the Better Care Network? So first of all, we facilitate active information exchange and collaboration to advocate for technically sound policy and programmatic action on global, regional, and national levels. As you can see here, this is our newsletter. And I'll discuss that a tiny bit more later on of different information that are available through our website, our newsletter, and others that might be useful for you when you're looking at these. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through three key areas. So first of all, the context of children without parental care. And so I'll kind of give you a bit more the global statistics around and what are the issues around that. Then better volunteering and better care initiatives. So what that initiative has done up to now and what it's planning to do. And next steps and further information. When I discussed with Eric, and also when I looked at Martin's presentation earlier this week, the idea is really to complement the great presentation that Martin did on Tuesday, to really focus on more the global aspect and the global work that's happening on that. So I think Martin really presented some great and key examples of what it looks like and what the issues are, whether it's around the orphanages that are happening in Nepal or in the volunteering and how that's fueling the industry that's related to residential care in that country. And so here it's much more going from a global perspective. What are the global issues related to children without parental care? What are some of the statistics that we know? What are some of the efforts that we're all working on within the development world and the child protection community more specifically? Any question whether on what we're going to cover and who we are at this stage?
Look good.
Great. So I'll start with the context and the situation of children without parental care. So from the latest statistics and estimate from UNICEF, at least 2.2 million children in the world live in residential care. But we know that that's really a significant underestimate. And that's because, and Martin really explained that extremely well on Tuesday, is that many of these facilities are unregulated. They are supported and started through private funding. They often are not authorized by the government. The government is not aware of them and definitely don't even know the number of children within these facilities. So we really think that the 2.2 million number of children is really, really low, and it's much, much higher than that. One of the findings that we do have, so there is a lot of studies of in some countries of children in residential care and the reason they were placed there, and the vast majority of these children are not orphans. The vast majority of them have parents, and in some countries it's up to 80% or over 80% of these children having at least one parent. So I think this is often a misconception, and when we talk about orphanages, that we think that these are for children who have no family, and that's just not the reality. The majority of the children are there for multiple other reasons that we're going to go through together. And we know that we do have an estimation of number of children who have lost one or two parents, and it's over 151 million children globally who've lost one or two parents. But we know that the majority of these children are living with their extended family, what we call kinship care. So it's either friends of family members or grandparents or aunt or uncles who are taking care of these children. And that's where we also lack a lot of data and understanding of those care arrangements and we really need to understand that to be able to better support these grandparents, the aunts, uncles, and other family members or friends of family members that are taking care of children who have lost one or two parents. So I hope you can see it's not too small. That this is really looking at the different factors that are leading to family separation. Often parents, and I know Martin's provided some specific information on that, but often parents feel that that placing their children in a children's home or an orphanage or residential care facility will provide them more opportunity to access services like school or health services, will address some of the issues that they're having in their community of not being able to access these services. Often, unfortunately, it's not the case, and it really highlights that the real reason of children being placed in these orphanages or recruited in these orphanages is more linked to poverty or lack of access. And so those could be addressed if we supported families and communities. Some other factors, I mean, natural disasters, and other emergency, whether they're conflict or others, also create a lot of separation during and following the crisis. Disability, whether it's disability of the child or disability of one of the parents or caregivers, is often a reason, again, because there's not appropriate services to provide to the child or the family to ensure that they can stay with them in the family structure that they're already in. And as you can see, there's many other support factors that are leading to family separation. Another one that's key is that the policies from governments or civil society and other actors, and the interventions from these actors are not appropriate, and they over-rely on institutionalization of children, i.e. Placing these children in residential care, rather than policies and interventions that are really supporting the families and the communities that can really prevent and address some of those key issues that I've just mentioned. Any questions here? Should I continue? All right.
A lot of no head shaking, no question.
Okay, I'll just check in regularly, but if I don't hear anything, I'll just continue. So I mean, what are the problems that we're facing? So first of all, many of these placements are avoidable. So as Martin has explained, a lot, if you're supporting these families, they would not feel the need or the pressure to place children into these orphanages. And also sometimes there's false promises of access to services such as school that often is not happening in the reality. As I mentioned, there's a lack of understanding and support of a care arrangement with extended family and family friends, what we call kinship care in our child protection world. And there's a lack of range of care options and over-reliance on residential care. So in some instances, there might be a crisis in the family and separation is unavoidable, but there's no other, in many countries, there's just the first resort is placing the child in a residential care, and there's no other alternative, whether it's foster care, whether it's any other type of care, maybe in a family environment that would be more conducive of supporting the child. Also, we've seen, and I believe Martin mentioned that as well, there's often inappropriate condition, and the standards of care are really lacking and poor in many of these places, and including a lack of maintaining contact with parents, which is so critical for these children. As I've mentioned, especially for private facilities that are using funding from private, whether they're volunteers, private donors, or others, there's a real lack of supervision of these centers. Another key area that we often forget about is the preparedness for independent living. So children who are raised in these orphanages or children home are then at the age of 18 asked to leave and to go in the world and get a job and have a family, etc., etc. And so often these children have not seen anything than the orphanage or lived in any other context, and they have no contact with their community or families. And so they're totally disconnected. And so there's a real need for children who have grown up in this setting to be prepared, to be supported, to become independent once they've reached 18. And as I mentioned, in too many cases, there's inappropriate policies, and basically these are the laws from governments and the intervention from governments and civil society and service providers to change this over-reliance on these residential care and support families. So why do we want to prevent family separation? And I'll spend a bit of time on this, if you don't mind, because this is really the research and the evidence that's kind of guiding all our work up till now. And the research has been showing and indicating for the past 30 years, and there's been quite a bit of research over the past 30 years, of the importance of the relationship between children and parents or their primary caregiver. It doesn't have to be their biological parents, but it could be their grandmother, their aunt, their uncle, etc. But that relationship, that one-to-one relationship, is extremely key for children's well-being, for their development, whether it's emotional, whether it's the brain development. And there's been studies on looking at the neural atrophy in the brain for children who don't get that direct relationship. And attachment disorder that is really, really common for children who are not getting that really key relationship. There's even been some studies around small orphanages that are providing really high-level standards, but they still don't provide that one-to-one relationship. And even with all the material support and all that, the studies do show that there are still some delays due to that lack of one-to-one relationship and ongoing relationship that's so key for children. It's even more key for very young children, children under 3, and there's been a lot of studies showing the impact of being brought up in institutional care, where there is not that relationship that that can help them develop their socially. And at every level, and the brain development, the emotional development, the social development. So these are really, really key evidence, and happy to provide you all that research that is available. There's also a lot of evidence some evidence that show that when children leave care, and that's why it's so critical to think about children who do leave care, they have experienced higher rate of unemployment and impact of on their access to education, contact with the law, some impact on their mental health, etc. And some of the research, for example, in Russia is really, really telling of looking at some of the really negative impact of children who've grown up and are leaving care, and their impact over time.
Hey, Sev, we actually did get a question. And I think it refers to the big cycle you showed a couple of slides back for different reasons that children might be, or the factors that lead to family separation. I'm not sure if it's in the slide, or you may have mentioned.
Afterward, I don't know.
What's that? Or
I think it was the one after
the slide after this, actually.
Sure.
Something about lack of understanding might have been mentioned on the part of families, and the questions about what's keeping families from pursuing better options. What's causing their belief that the orphanage is the best option?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple things. First of all, if they don't have the service, so access to school within their community. So if we, as the child protection community and the development community don't provide that, then if there's an orphanage that opens up in the next village, or the next, or in the further down, or in the urban area that provides education, or says it provides education, parents will think that it might be better for to send their children there. Now, I mean, in some places education is provided and is of high quality, but in many cases it isn't, and so there's also that false promise as well that these children will have access to these services that in some instances are not provided. But even if there is, and as I've mentioned with the research and the evidence that's available, even if the best conditions are provided, if that day-to-day care and relationship with a parent or a primary caregiver is not there, it's really going to impact the child's development. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, I kind of just was like, I mean, are they like against having the kids live with a relative or something that can take better care? I'm just wondering, like, is there like a...
Just 1 second. We're getting to the question.
It's like, is there like something that they believe, or that like
are
some
they as
tradition?
uneducated as we are? Like
Right.
we were.
I was seeing a few questions about this, and I might add a little bit, Sev, because part of what I'm seeing, and part of this comes from some of my experience as well, is on the ground, it might look like quite a good option in some ways. Similar to us, just looking quickly at this issue, volunteering in an orphanage might look like quite a good option. But part of what you're saying is that what's presented to the parents as an option looks good, but everything that the child rights community knows about child flourishing suggests that actually sometimes quite systematically these aren't good options, but even when they look great, the research on children shows us that it'd be better to be having the child with the uncle or the aunt or somehow in the community. Is that?
I think yes. I think that's definitely a great response. Thank you, Eric. In regards of, no, I think one of the other point that was touched on, which I think is really important, is around the belief and kind of what we call in our sector social norms. So the belief that that is the best option for children. And culturally, that's not the case. In general, culturally, in many of these countries, in our own countries, the belief will be that children are better with the grandparent or the aunt or the uncle or with their parents when the parents are there. So that is our natural belief. Now, what we are seeing in many countries, and definitely in what we call low-income countries, so developing countries, is that it feels like, oh, well, we'll create an orphanage and that will answer all the problems of these families. And we know from the evidence that it's not. Even, first of all, the quality of care in those places are often underneath the standards. And second of all, even if the standards were the highest, we know that if there's not that ongoing relationship and development, that's really going to hinder the child in the future. So I think it's not cultural at all, whether it's within our own culture or within all these different countries across Asia or Africa to send children in orphanages. This is a construct that's been created really more recently and often funded by international funders, so people from the US and Europe who would not even think of that option as a viable option in their own country. So I think that's where it's really interesting to think that through a bit more. Why do people think it would be a better option in a country in Africa or in Asia when within their own country they don't think that would be the best option for their children? So just food for thought.
Thank you. And I'm sure we want to keep some momentum, but I just wanted, Kerrigan, did you have another comment or question?
So are they just, the families there, do they just not know, like, are they just hoping for the best option? Like, are they hoping for that one orphanage that does have the actual, like, kind of better circumstances? Like, is that why? Or are they just all educated as we were on the fact that how terrible the orphanages are?
Right.
I think there's a lack of understanding, the same way as we have that lack of understanding of what the reality is and what the consequence can be on children. There's also a real fundamental that services are lacking. And so what we're seeing as well, which is really counterintuitive, is that governments, civil society, private funders are funding these solutions that the evidence have shown are not good for children in the long run. And rather than supporting and funding solutions that are providing the services to the families and the communities that would prevent that situation in the first place. So it's also a misallocation of effort, of commitment, and of funding. So it's how do we change that? And we'll go through, I'll present a bit more some of the positive. It's not all gloomy. There are some positive efforts happening, which is about changing that paradigm and changing that over-reliance on residential care as the only solution for children if they're don't access services or etc. And also raising awareness within communities that the negative consequences of this practice, and ensuring that families and communities have the resources and have these services to be able to care for their children. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. I kind of like this conversation as we go along, so please don't hesitate. If you have other questions, just, I was going to say raise your hand, but I won't see it. But so I'll move on from there. So what should be done? So that kind of answers and follows what we were talking about. So what do we need to do? And when I say we, it's the development community, it's the governments, it's the practitioners, the service providers, but it's also the academics, it's also the volunteers, it's also the general public, it's the private funders that are providing money and really care about these issues. It's really all of us. But really looking at what we call policies and interventions. So policies, again, it's all the laws, the guidance that a government or at the international level we provide to really strengthen the capacity of parents and families to care for their children. And even in adversity, so in very whether it's during a crisis, a family crisis, or when it's linked to extreme poverty or an emergency situation, etc. How do we strengthen the capacity of parents and families to care for their children? And how does that prevent the child-family separation? And how can we, if children are separated, because it does happen very often, and in some instances it may need to happen if there's a real problem in the family setting. How do you reintegrate these children either back to their family or to another family, extended family, or family base that is safe and nurturing for children? And when children are separated from their families, how do you ensure that there's a large range of different types of care and that we don't automatically go to placing children in these large residential care that we know are not in the best interest for these children? So looking at foster care, looking at extended family members, looking at all these other options that might be much more supportive of children, even if it's for a short period of time while the issues with the original family is being addressed and hopefully children are reintegrated. So that's really the core pillars of how can we address all these issues, and we are already doing it. And there's, as the next slide says, there's really significant progress to date. First of all, overall at the global level, I mean, the Convention for the Rights of the Child highlights how it's really important for children to be living and brought up in a family community. And the guidelines for the alternative care of children, which was welcomed by the UN in 2009, provides extensive guidance for governments, for service providers, for the civil society, for parents, for children, for the general public and academics, how to work together to try to address the issues. And I've just put one of the articles that really highlights that comes from the guidelines, which highlights what we've been talking about, that the family being the fundamental group of society and the natural environment for the growth, well-being, and protection of children. Efforts should primarily be directed to enabling the child to remain in or return to the care of his or her parents, or when appropriate, other close family members. The state should ensure that families have access to forms of support in the caregiving role. So the importance of supporting families. Any question from there?
Nope.
Okay. So other significant progress, it's not just at the international level, guidance, there's real momentum, and we talk about child care reform. And sorry, sometimes there's a lot of jargon, but what we mean by child care reform is really how do we change the system that protects children and families and communities to really strengthen families, so to prevent family separation, and then also ensure that the appropriate type of care is provided if children are separated from their family. And we're seeing a lot of efforts a lot of countries doing this. And so whether in across the world, whether in Eastern Europe, we have in Moldova, Georgia, Bulgaria, that are doing amazing work in doing those, and many, many more. In Africa, we have many countries such as Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi, Namibia, Liberia, Ghana. In Latin America and Central America, we have many countries such as Costa Rica, Honduras, Paraguay. In Asia, Martin has spoken very eloquently of the work that's happening in Nepal. We're seeing similar efforts in Cambodia, in Indonesia, and many other countries. There's also some regional initiatives that are happening of countries coming together and basically trying to push to stop the placement of children under 3 in residential care or in institutional care, because of the evidence showing how it can really negatively impact these young children. We're seeing care leavers, peer groups, and association, unfortunately not enough, but some of them, such as the Kenya Society of Care Leavers, does amazing work in Kenya of really bringing together young people who have been brought up in children's homes and who are doing peer support, who are raising awareness, who are preparing other young people to leave the care and to start independent living. There's also been a lot of engagement with faith-based actors, and I'll touch a tiny bit more about it later on through the Better Volunteering, Better Care initiative. There's for example, the Faith to Action initiative. Again, I can provide you further information on their work. They're doing really critical work and around raising awareness with mainly U.S. Christian-based actors on how best to engage to support children and families. And so really raising awareness on the issues that we're talking about, that maybe supporting orphanages is not the best way forward, but supporting families and communities and would be the best way of providing the support. And there's a lot of commitment and support coming from the faith-based actors. And so it's really heartening to see initiatives such as the Faith to Action engaging on this topic. And then there's the engagement on volunteering with volunteering communities. And so that's what we'll discuss a bit more, and that Eric and myself and many others have been really starting to work together more to build the knowledge and trying to raise awareness on these issues. So just I don't want to end on a bad note. I mean, there is a lot of momentum, but there is still a lot of challenges. So there's still a tendency of over-relying on institutional care in many countries, and often it's due to vested interest and lack of alternatives. And again, Martin really provided some specific example of the vested interest, and also that's fueled through the volunteering in residential care. Because it's providing a lot of funding, it's becoming a business model. So it's understanding that and really trying to raise awareness around these issues. As I've mentioned, often there's too much of an attention of how do we get children out of institutions, and there's a limited focus on how do we prevent them being there in the first place, and how do we shift that whole framework that is over-relying on these residential care. So a lot is being done, still a lot to do, so it's really important to maintain the momentum, and we all have a place in making that change, and definitely that's why I'm going to be very excited to hear from the work and seeing over time the work that you're being involved in. So that's really the context more broadly, and now I'm going to go further in detail around the volunteer issue. I'll stop here and just see if there's any question more on the overall context around children without appropriate care.
Looks like we have one.
Okay.
Are there countries where this is particularly pronounced, or a country that has the biggest problem with this?
There are many countries. It's hard to provide a list. I mean, Eastern Europe had really that was a big issue for many years, and still remains a big issue. However, we're seeing countries really making a difference and changing that whole paradigm around that. So, but that definitely Eastern and Central Europe were very key, because like Romania, that was an automatic, and these very large institutions that were there. So, but now, we're really seeing proliferation of residential care and across really across Africa. And for example, Uganda, there's been an increase of orphanages that's really been quite outstanding, and a lot of it funded by external foreign funding, mainly from the US and Europe. So Ghana has seen the same. But these countries are also working really hard to try to change that pattern. So that's really very heartening. And in Asia as well, Indonesia has been. It's been quite a big issue as well. India, as Martin mentioned, Nepal, Cambodia as well. But again, these countries, the government and the service providers, the NGOs, the civil society are really working hard to address it. So in regards to volunteering, first of all, one of the things we've noticed is that there's really been an increasing trend of volunteering overall over the past few decades, but also over the past 10 years, I would say, there's really been an increase in volunteering within residential care facilities, such as orphanages and children's homes. So it's become more and more prominent, and whether we just go to any website promoting volunteering, whether we go on Facebook, I mean, we really see that it's more and more common. So before we delve into what the Better Volunteer, Better Care has been doing, I mean, the first is, why is it a problem? And I think, Martin really showcased some really strong and quite difficult examples of some of the risk involved with that. But first of all, it really encourages and sustains this model of residential care as the first resort. Again, it doesn't mean that residential care is always bad for short term, but here it really sustained that whole idea that is the best option all the time for children, and for whatever reason. It also makes children vulnerable to abuse in those areas where regulation is lax. So it just provides open doors to anyone to access children that we would never accept in our own countries, whether here or other countries. So why do we accept doing that in other countries? It's a real question. As I've mentioned, many children who are already in these facilities are encountering some really strong attachment disorder issues. And so having people coming in just for short term and just leaving over and over again, it just compounds that impact and that negative impact for children. Also, as we know, I mean, and that's much broader around volunteering in general, there is this imbalance of power. There's all these cultural differences. Martin also, whether it's just even speaking the same language, Martin also touched on, and I think really eloquently, around the issue of some of these issues, as well as the issue of replacing staff that's from the community who will be in contact and reference for these children over time, also taking job opportunities for local communities, and a wide range of other issues. So these are just a few, and I hope complement and or reinforce what Martin has spoken about on Tuesday very, very eloquently from the perspective of Nepal, which I think is really from the perspective of any country. So what is Better Volunteering, Better Care? What have we been doing? So the Better Care Network and Save the Children started in late 2013, a interagency initiative to really bring people together to think about what are the issues, what do we know, what do we not know and need to know, how do we raise awareness around these issues, and what can we do together. There's an interagency steering group that are all these key child protection actors that were really concerned about this issue and already working on this issue. For example, Friends International is doing really amazing work in Cambodia on that. And I think, again, Martin mentioned that in his presentation, and I will, hopefully, if we have enough time, highlight that a bit more later on. But you see there's many others, EGPAT, UNICEF, Faith to Action Initiative, which I mentioned before, working on the issue of engaging U.S. Christian-based actors on these issues. Hope and Home, etc. We have an amazing consultancy team, and I'm sure Eric can second that, led by Anna, who's been really doing wonderful work for all of us to first of all do extensive research to understand better what are the issues, what are the trends, who is involved, who are the key actors that we need to communicate, reach out with, work with. We had a fantastic workshop, and Eric and Martin were there with many others who were really committed to the issue, who've been working on this issue around the world and across, the child protection, the international development community, but also really the academic, the tourism sector, the faith-based sector. So really trying to bring all these key actors wanting to make a difference to share what has been done at within different countries or at global level, and really brainstorm what do we need to do to raise awareness around this issue and create change. And when we're talking about creating change, is raising awareness around the harm around my computer is just moving forward without me. Raising awareness around the harm of, or the potential harm of volunteering in residential care, but also looking at other alternatives. What would be good volunteering or learning services that really would be supportive of children and supportive of families and communities. And right now, with the finding from the workshop and the research, the team, under the guidance of the steering committee and the input of all the actors involved in the workshop and beyond, we're developing a interagency engagement strategy that is going to look at all the different components that we need to think about and work together to create the change that we want to see. In regards of the research, so the research team have surveyed nearly 150 volunteers and accessed information from even a broader range of volunteers to get their views and their thoughts on this. Has done over 120 informant interviews of experts across child protection, universities, tourism, corporate world, and extensive literature reviews, and a really interesting internet analysis as well of what is being offered around volunteering online, which is quite interesting. So a few of the documents that will be available in the next month is an overview of trends in volunteering. There's an overview more specifically on volunteering in residential care centers. There's also 4-country focus on Cambodia, Nepal, Guatemala, and Ghana. And there's also a internet analysis that I haven't put here, but that's also quite interesting. I mean, some of the findings...
a question, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Like, what are the surveys consist of for these volunteers? Like, what were they asking them?
Ooh, good question. I think Anna would be the best place to respond, but I think some of the questions were around their own motivation, why they were doing this, what kind of volunteering they were doing, what was their experience, what they liked, what they didn't like, and so really trying to understand the reason of doing that. And what's been really interesting is that there's been a lot of findings of volunteers going and really wanting to make a difference, and then realizing that things are not maybe what they expected, or little by little they realize that the practice that that's happening and that they're supporting is maybe questionable. Then some other instance, we all know motivation is a combination of wanting to do good, and then also your own personal motivations of what you want to get out of the experience for your own personal growth. And that can also be academic, that can be building your resume and things like that. So they did a set of questionnaire for volunteers, people who do go abroad and volunteer. And then they also did a questionnaire for organizations that are sending volunteers, and looking at what are the volunteer options they provide. Do they have child protection policies in place and things like that? Again, Anna would be able to provide much more detailed information, and I can send you further information after this meeting, this course.
We've got two questions that relate to one another about what BCN does. One was, is BCN more about discouraging orphanages or about discouraging this particular kind of international volunteering? And the other is the focus on awareness raising and research. Does BCN do anything on the ground?
Yeah, so two great questions. I think our core focus is ensuring that children get the best care possible. So whatever that is. So how do we support families? And how do we prevent separation of families? How do we get children back with families? And how, if they are separated, that there's what we call a large range of different type of care, alternative care available. And so that's really our overall mission and purpose. How do we do that? Is we build the knowledge and the research around it, and we share it through many means, including our website, newsletter that I'll touch on a bit later. We provide technical support and assistance by developing tools, or by just responding to queries from actors at all levels and around the world, whether it's a community-based actor in a specific country, whether it's a government, whether it's global international policymakers. So large range, and we just provide technical assistance in those ways. And then our third core area is really bringing people together to share, and really wide range of people, and to really try to convene, to share, and to create change and work together. So it's really about joint efforts. So it's overall around care of children and children without family care, and looking at those issues. But obviously, we're seeing that volunteering is a key factor that is sustaining some forms of care that are not always in the best interest of children. And so we're engaging on that from that perspective. Does that respond to both questions?
Yes, I think so.
So it differs from Martin's, where you're not actually going in and taking children out of the houses. You're doing more building awareness of the problem.
Exactly. So we're more looking at building the knowledge and building the capacity and bringing people together. So, for example, and that's why it's very complementary to the presentation from Martin, who's really working with the governments and other actors around how to provide interventions that are supporting families, really providing the services, and also getting children out of institution back with their families, which is much more the programmatic intervention in country, which is what I think you're referring to, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So these are some of the countries where we're seeing the volunteering and international volunteering in residential care happening. Previously, it was very prominent in Eastern Europe, but now we're seeing it also becoming more and more prominent in countries such as Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Indonesia, Nepal, India, Ghana, Gambia, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Ethiopia, South Africa, Haiti, Guatemala, Peru, and Chile. And in some countries, as Martin has presented in Nepal, and we can see also in Cambodia, as well as Thailand, Kenya, and Indonesia, there's also what we see briefcase orphanages. So these orphanages that are opening really because it's an opportunity to raise funds and through that practice. So I'm not sure how are we doing on time.
We have 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll go through this quickly.
Maybe a little bit more than that.
Okay, we're almost there. So, I mean, why these areas? First of all, they're a popular tourist destination. They're developing economies with a large number of the population living in poverty. Some of them have experienced natural disaster that often create separation of children from families. As we've seen, many of these countries are working on increasing their ability to regulate care institutions, but often they're still challenged in being able to regulate all these care institutions and providing alternative care options, specifically family-based. And also, as Martin mentioned, for example, in Nepal, that's really the case. There's also a lack of the ability to regulate volunteers from the government and other actors. So what we're doing with the Better Volunteering, Better Care, it's we're really building the knowledge and trying to share the information that we have, so we understand better these trends and who's involved and how it's happening where. We're really trying to share what each organization is doing to learn from one another, to join forces and increase impact. And as I mentioned earlier on, we're developing this comprehensive engagement strategy, which really is looking about joint action across all the actors, whether it's the academic, the universities, whether it's the faith-based community, whether it's the corporate world, the tourism sector, and how can we work together on to have joint action to raise awareness and identify other alternatives that are more supportive of children and families. So I'll just finish and then we can open up, because just looking at time. For more information on the issue more broadly of children without appropriate family care, definitely please feel free to visit our website. Let me know. You can also register to our newsletter. You can do that online, or Eric can provide your email address and to me, and I can add these. We have working papers that really kind of try to summarize the evidence and the issues around children without appropriate family care. And so I'm happy to send you links to those. If I think Eric might already have provided you some of these.
That's right.
And then there's, really finding out more from your perspective and just spreading the word of this issue, and a few links that we thought would be useful. I think Martin may have mentioned some of these already, but think before visiting, and that's really what's been all right, let me try to see if I can do this. Oops. So this is what I think Martin has shown. Can you see the website?
No, we're still looking at your slides.
Okay, maybe this is too. So I'm not going to even try because I don't want to lose you again. But anyway, these links, there's the first one, which is, I really wanted to take the time to go through them with you, but hopefully you have these or you can get these. Think Before Visiting is Friends International, the campaign they've done in Cambodia, which has really interesting information and articles and documentaries and tips and all that. The Learning Service videos is really useful to understand the issue. And if you are looking at volunteering, kind of rethinking the whole volunteer model and more looking at how these are more like learning opportunities. And in that list of videos, there's one specifically on orphanage tourism, so or orphanage volunteering. So I would really highly recommend looking at that. There's the article that's here is a really interesting article that gives you tips and things to think about when around this issue. And then on the BCN website, we're starting to collate information, including the findings of our research, and we'll be adding as soon as more is available, as well as work that is happening from the different people that are in organization involved in this, including the great work Eric is doing and many other organizations. Also some articles that might be useful, some papers on this topic that would be useful. So that would be my recommendation. Find out more and spread the word.
Thank you, Sev. Thank you for the presentation. I'll see if there are any ending questions. I myself had one, which was, as I've been in conversations with people, sooner or later I'll be in a conversation with someone who, like you and I, has been in a developing country and been in a place where there are many children on the street who seem well, visibly they seem to be children who spend a lot of time on the street at the very least. Often in conversations, people will say, what about these children? What's not going to orphanages going to do to help these children?
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good question, because children we call them connected to the street because there's multiple reasons why they're on the street. Some of them are living with their parents, but they go to the street to make a living. So placing them in an orphanage is not going to really resolve the issue. I mean, I think looking at how to address the issues that are forcing or compelling this child to go on the street to make a living, often because of extreme poverty and others reason, those would be the way to address this issue. Some others are living on the street, and that could be because they ended up there following a crisis, either with their family or maybe because they have an emergency. And again, there's amazing work. Friends International does really good work. Retrack has been doing amazing work around trying to understand the reason of why that child has made that choice, and then working with the child and the family to try to find a solution that is addressing those original reason. It could be mediation with the family. It could be, again, providing the support, the access to services, the financial support that's needed for the child to return. It could be many other reasons. And so again, often we automatically think of, oh well, let's get the child off the street into an orphanage, and it doesn't really address the root cause of why that child made that decision in the first place.
Great, thank you. And I got another question from the students, which is, do you have any suggestions for the most effective way for us to raise awareness about this issue beyond sharing the websites?
So I think the project that you're working on, we're really excited about it. So we're really going to follow that closely and can't wait to see what you're going to come up with. I think that's amazing, of brainstorming of ways that can connect, to raise awareness within your community, within your friends, within your family. So I'm kind of flipping the question of what you think would make sense, because a lot of the people who are volunteering are your peers. So what do you think would work to raise awareness from your perspective?